All my jewelry was gone. Every piece from my wedding, my mother, my grandmother, and my daughter-in-law just looked at me and said, they were old anyway. The words didn't echo. They just fell, flat and cold, into the quiet of our living room. Outside, the rain pressed against the glass, and the smell of the sea crept in through the window frame. Our house sat quietly between pine trees in the sea breeze, and in that moment, it felt like the ocean had stopped breathing. I opened the safe again, hoping my eyes were wrong. The velvet boxes were still there, but empty, like tiny coffins. The necklace with the amber stone from my wedding day, the emerald ring my husband saved 3 years to buy me, the bracelet my mother wore when she buried her own mother. Gone, all of it. When I turned around, Sabrina was scrolling on her phone. Her legs crossed, her nails glittering with the same color as the stone that used to be mine. Why? I asked. My voice was a whisper that didn't feel like mine. She shrugged. I needed the money. They were just sitting there. You never wore them. I wanted to scream, but you can't scream when something inside you breaks silently. You just stand there, watching your entire life reduced to a transaction. The lamp beside her flickered, throwing a thin line of light across the floor. That same lamp had been there when my husband proposed to me, when we brought Ethan home from the hospital, when my mother told me to keep something precious safe, even if no one else understands its value. I guess that night, I learned what she meant. Ethan came downstairs when he heard my voice crack. He stood between us like a boy torn in half. Mom, let's just talk about this later, he said, eyes glued to the floor. But I saw it then. The fear, the shame, the part of him that had already chosen a side. Outside, the thunder rolled like someone dragging chains across the sky. Inside, I looked at the mirror above the mantel and saw a woman I didn't recognize. Hair half gray, eyes dim, but alive with something I hadn't felt in years. Resolve. They thought I was too old to notice, too quiet to fight back, but they didn't know that the house had eyes, that sometimes the truth records itself, long before you decide to speak. This is just the beginning. Subscribe if you want to see how it all turns around. And if you think you already know where this is going, comment 1, and we'll see if you're right. My name is Margaret Hayes, though everyone in town calls me Maggie. I'm 68 this spring, born and raised on the coast of South Carolina, the kind of place where the rain smells like salt and pine, and silence isn't lonely, just familiar. Our house sits quietly between the ocean and a line of whispering trees. It isn't grand, but it carries every season of my life inside its walls. After my husband, Henry, passed, I made a promise to keep this home alive. The garden, the porch, the kettle that hums a tune before dawn. Henry used to say, "This house breathes because you do." Maybe that's why I never left. Every rose bush in the yard is a memory. Every photo on the shelf, a heartbeat I refused to lose. When my son Ethan got married, I told him to stay here until he and Sabrina found their footing. He resisted at first, said he didn't want to burden me. But I told him, "You don't burden the roots that raised you." He smiled, that same crooked smile Henry had when he tried to patch the roof in hurricane season. The kind of smile that said, "It might leak, but it'll hold." Then Sabrina moved in. Boxes of perfume, laughter that bounced off the hallway walls, and enough energy to make the house feel young again. For a while, it felt like spring had returned. New recipes filled my kitchen. Her bright clothes swayed on the line, and I found myself believing she might be the daughter I never had. We'd sit on the porch in the evenings, sipping tea as the tide shifted colors. She'd ask about my jewelry, the gold necklace Henry gave me on our wedding night, the sapphire earrings from my mother, the ruby brooch from my grandmother. I'd tell her the stories behind each piece, and she'd listen with wide eyes, tracing the edges like they held some secret magic. Once, she said, "They're beautiful, Maggie. Maybe one day, when you're ready, you'll pass them down." I smiled. That's the plan. I didn't know then that my kindness, my open hands, would one day become the key that unlocked everything I tried to protect. Back then, all I saw was a young woman trying to build a life with my son, and I wanted to make it easier for her. I cooked her favorite meals, folded their laundry when she forgot, and sometimes slipped extra cash into the grocery jar when bills piled up. Ethan worked long shifts at the dockyard. Sabrina was figuring out her online business. I told myself, love grows best when you water it, even if you're the only one holding the watering can. Every morning, I'd step barefoot into the garden, dew still fresh on the grass, and whisper a quiet prayer. Keep this family together, Lord. Keep them kind. And sometimes, when the rain came soft and steady, I'd feel Henry's presence, not as a ghost, but as the warmth of something I still believed in. One night, after dinner, Sabrina came into the living room wearing my old shawl. She twirled in front of the mirror and laughed. "You've got such timeless style, Maggie. You make old things look like treasure." I smiled. "It's just old fabric and older memories." "No," she said softly. "It's history, and history deserves to shine." I didn't know then how those words would come back to haunt me. Still, life felt soft again for a while. Ethan and Sabrina would sit by the fire on rainy nights. She'd play music on her phone while he fixed the radio, and I'd sit quietly, knitting, pretending not to notice how happy he looked. Those were good days. Fragile, fleeting, but good. Sometimes, late at night, I'd open my safe, not to count or guard, just to remember. The jewelry inside wasn't about gold or diamonds. It was about time. Each piece held a story of love, of struggle, of promises kept through storms. Henry once told me, "These aren't treasures, Maggie. They're proof you lived and loved." So I kept them like one keeps breath, unseen but vital. I thought I was guarding memories. I didn't realize someone else was watching me guard value. Sabrina started asking little questions, harmless on the surface. "Do you ever think about selling a few pieces, Maggie? Gold prices are up, you know." I laughed it off. "Oh, they're just family things." She smiled, too sweetly. "Still, you could make a fortune. You deserve something nice." The way she said it, soft, almost tender, made something stir in me, a whisper of unease. But I brushed it aside. People who love each other don't take advantage. At least, that's what I'd always believed. One evening, while washing dishes, I glanced toward the hallway. The safe door was closed, as it should be, but the curtain beside it moved, just slightly, as if someone had brushed past. When I checked, the room was empty. Still, I caught myself locking it twice that night. It's strange how hindsight works. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. But love has a way of turning warning lights into candles. You tell yourself it's nothing. You tell yourself people change, not betray. And before you know it, what you called family starts to feel like foreshadowing. Sometimes, when the house gets too quiet, I close my eyes and drift back to the day I married Henry Hayes. It was the spring of 1978. The air smelled of magnolia and ocean salt, and the sun looked softer then, like it knew it was lighting up something that would last. He stood under a willow tree behind my mama's church, his suit too big, his smile even bigger. I still remember the way his hands trembled when he slipped that gold band on my finger. The same hands that would later build the house I live in now, board by board, with love instead of nails. We didn't have much, but Henry had a way of making everything feel like more. After dinner, he'd walk me down to the shore, the waves licking our feet, the sky fading to lavender. He'd say, "One day, Maggie, I'll buy you something that shines like this ocean." He kept his promise. Years later, when the fishing business finally steadied, he came home with a small velvet box tucked inside his jacket. Inside was a necklace, a single amber stone set in gold. "It's not the ocean," he said, "but it's the light that guides me back to you." I laughed and cried, all at once. I wore that necklace every Sunday for 40 years. Over time, that box grew heavier. An emerald ring for our 10th anniversary. Sapphire earrings when Ethan was born. The ruby brooch my mother left me before she passed. Each piece wasn't just a jewel. It was a heartbeat, a timestamp of everything we had survived. Every storm that ripped our roof. Every Christmas that found us broke, but still singing. Every time Henry came home, smelling of the sea, but smiling like we were already rich. He used to joke that love was our only currency, and we'd spent it well. When Henry's body began to fail him, his spirit never did. On one of his last good days, he held my hand and said, "Promise me, Maggie, keep those pieces safe, not for the gold, but for what they remind you of." I promised, and for years, I kept that promise the way sailors keep their vows to the tide. Faithfully, even when no one's watching. After he was gone, those pieces became my heartbeat in metal and stone. Sometimes, when rain whispered against the window, I'd lay them out on the table and talk to him softly. Tell him about Ethan's job at the dockyard, about the roses that refused to die, about how the sea still smelled the same. When the amber caught the lamplight, I could almost see his eyes reflected back. They were my keepsakes, yes, but also my way of keeping the world from collapsing into silence. Then came Sabrina. Perfume, laughter, and bright red nails. She moved through the house like a gust of youth, rearranging cushions, humming pop songs, opening every curtain to let in light. For a while, I let myself believe she was that light. She'd sit beside me while I polished the jewelry, eyes wide, fingers hovering over the stones like she was touching history itself. "You could sell one of these, Maggie," she said once, half teasing. "People would pay a fortune." I laughed. "Oh, they're not for sale, dear. Some things only buy memories, not money." She smiled politely, but her gaze stayed a beat too long on the amber pendant. Something faint but cold brushed across my chest, like a shadow passing the window. Weeks drifted by. The weather warmed, but inside me something cooled. I began noticing little things, too small to matter, too strange to ignore. A silver pin missing from its pouch. A drawer left open that I knew I'd closed. A faint scent of her perfume near my bedroom door. One evening, as the sun dyed red across the porch, I saw the safe key lying, turned just slightly, the metal catching the light like an open eye. Maybe it was my imagination. That's what I told myself. But even imagination leaves fingerprints. That night, while washing dishes, I heard Sabrina's voice in the hallway. Soft, rushed, private, a short laugh. Then, "I'll handle it. Just trust me." The words didn't mean much, but the tone did. Sharp, purposeful, certain. Something cold slid through me, like seawater under a closed door. I wanted to ask her right then, but love, or maybe pride, made me wait. At dinner, she smiled across the table, cheerful as always. But her eyes didn't smile with her. I realized then it wasn't what she said that frightened me. It was what she didn't. Later, after they'd gone upstairs, I stood alone in the hallway. The house creaked softly, as if shifting in its sleep. I opened the safe. My fingers brushed a thin film of dust along the handle. Dust that shouldn't have been there if it hadn't been touched. The air felt heavier, the silence too still. For the first time in years, my home didn't feel like mine. It felt watched. I closed the safe gently, turning the key twice. The metal clicked with a finality that felt like prayer. "Henry," I whispered into the dark, "something's changing in this house." The thunder didn't answer. Only the waves, distant, steady, warning me of a storm I couldn't yet see. And I knew, deep in the quiet of that night, that something sacred was slipping through my fingers. Not yet stolen, but already halfway gone. The morning after that uneasy night, the air hung heavy, thick with salt and something sour. The rain had stopped, but the sky still carried its bruises. Long purple clouds stretched over the water like old scars. I brewed coffee the way Henry liked it, waiting for the ritual to calm my nerves. It didn't. From the kitchen, I heard Sabrina's heels in the hallway. Click, pause, click. A rhythm too sharp for a house built on soft things. She was humming a tune I didn't recognize. Bright and careless. When I stepped into the living room, she stood near the safe, dust rag moving over the shelf above it with theatrical innocence. "Morning," I said. "Morning, Maggie," she answered, smiling without looking up. That smile, polite, perfect, hollow, was the first crack in my peace. I moved around the room like a stranger in my own life, tidying coasters that didn't need tidying, straightening frames already straight. Outside, the ocean dragged its breath across the shore. Inside, I felt the same dragging inside my chest. Ethan had left before dawn for a double shift at the dockyard. Overtime that smelled like desperation. The house liked him best early in the morning, when his boots were still damp with seawater and promise. Today, it felt like it couldn't remember his name. 2 nights later, it happened. Ethan was on the late shift. Sabrina said she was stepping out for groceries. The back door sighed, then shut too quickly, like someone hushing a secret. I folded a towel, then another, though the basket was empty. My hands felt made of cotton, light, useless. Something pulled me toward the hallway, toward the safe that had carried our history, like a heart carries blood. The key felt colder than usual when I touched it, as if the metal had kept a memory I didn't want. I turned it slowly. Inside, nothing. The boxes were there, but wrong, light, hollow, like tiny coffins that had lost their dead. Every piece gone. Henry's amber necklace, my mother's sapphire earrings, the emerald ring that carried 40 years of my breath, gone. My body didn't react at first. It was like the air had left the room before I did. Then my knees buckled, and the sound that came from me wasn't human. It was the sound of something unloved, breaking. I searched everywhere. Drawers, closets, under the bed, inside shoes I hadn't worn in a decade. I tore open trash bags with trembling hands. The house watched me, bare and helpless. The sea, faithful, ancient, kept breathing without me. The front door swung open, and Sabrina walked in with grocery bags and that same humming tune. I stood in the living room, the empty velvet box in my hands, like the mouth of a wound. "Sabrina, where are they?" She blinked. "Where's what?" "The jewelry. All of it." She froze for half a second, just long enough to confess without words. Then she let out a small laugh, the kind you use when the waiter gets your order wrong. "Oh, Maggie," You never wear them. I sold a few pieces. We needed the money. You'll thank me later. Sold them? My voice cracked on the word. You sold my wedding necklace? The world doesn't run on sentiment, she said, setting the groceries down. Ethan's been struggling. You would have done the same if you actually wanted to help him. The room tilted, as if the floor had grown a pulse. You had no right, I said. It came out quiet, but I felt the heat of it in my throat. I had every right, she snapped. This is our house too. The word "our" hit me like a slap. The door opened again. Ethan stepped in, rain still on his jacket, hair flattened from the wind. He took in our faces, the box in my hands, the air crowded with a conversation that had already happened without him. What's going on? He asked. I looked at him. My boy, the one I raised through storms and summers, the one I taught to say please, and thank you, and I'm sorry. She sold them, I whispered. Henry's necklace, my mother's ring. Sabrina moved toward him like lightning. Ethan, she's exaggerating. I pawned a couple pieces. We had to cover the loan. He hesitated, just a flicker in the eyes, and then sighed. Mom, they were just things. Just things. That sentence shattered something no thief could ever touch. He didn't look at me again. He took her hand. The world went very, very quiet. The kind of quiet that burns. I didn't scream. I simply closed the safe, turned the key, and said, things can be bought back. Trust can't. Then I walked upstairs, each step echoing like a countdown to something I didn't want to meet. Days passed in a haze of polite silence. Ethan avoided me. Sabrina behaved like nothing had happened. Cheery, practiced, ministering to the house like it was hers to heal. The air smelled like her perfume now, sweet and wrong, cloying, where Henry's aftershave used to linger like comfort after rain. I cleaned the kitchen twice a day, organized drawers that didn't need organizing, stood in the doorway of the bedroom longer than a person should stand in any doorway. The house had a way of holding people together, even when they didn't want to be held. Now, it felt like it had loosened its grip. One evening, I heard them whispering in the kitchen. She's acting cold, Sabrina said. She'll come around, Ethan answered, sounding tired enough to turn into furniture. Or maybe she won't. Something in her tone made my blood chill. It was the casual threat of someone who'd already counted the exits. Later that night, I checked the safe again. I had started using a second latch, one Henry had installed years ago, just in case. The latch was gone, cleanly removed, as if it had never existed. I opened it, empty, still, but this time I noticed something else missing. The small USB drive where I kept family photos, the one that held backup footage from the living room for insurance, a habit Henry had teased me about, and then quietly encouraged. They didn't know what was on it. They took it anyway. I went downstairs, heart pounding. Sabrina sat by the fireplace, scrolling through her phone, the screen lighting her face like a shallow moon. Ethan was on the couch, posture folded, eyes tired. Did you take my USB? I asked. Mom, please, Ethan said, rubbing his brow. You're making this ugly. Ugly? It already is. Sabrina stood. Her eyes were polished stones. We can't live like this. You don't trust me. I looked at my son. He didn't speak. That was the cruelty. Not the words, but the silence of the one who should have defended me. Finally, he said softly, maybe it's better if you take some time away, just for a while. I felt the floor tilt again. You're sending me away from my own home? I asked. It's not like that, Mom. Then what is it like, Ethan? I asked. And suddenly, my voice wasn't quiet anymore. He didn't answer. Rain began again, tentative against the window, like small hands knocking. I went to my room. I packed a small bag, a sweater, a nightgown, the old shawl Sabrina liked to wear. Though I didn't know why, I took it. Habit makes you tidy for people who've made a mess of you. Into the inner pocket of my coat, I slipped one thing they didn't know existed: a separate drive wired to the tiny camera Henry had hidden years ago after a hurricane. Just in case, he'd said with a smile, as if insurance were romance. Before I left, I stood by the door and looked at my son. He held Sabrina's hand. Her head rested on his shoulder. The picture would have been perfect if it weren't so wrong. "You chose your peace over my truth," I said. "May you sleep well in that." He didn't stop me. Outside, the storm had returned in full force. The wind howled like it was mourning with me. I walked to the car, clutching the empty box. The thing weighed almost nothing. The moment weighed more than gold. Lightning flashed, and for a second, I saw my reflection in the car window. A woman drained, but not defeated. The ocean roared somewhere beyond the trees, like it was reminding me that every tide that leaves always comes back. I slid into the driver's seat and let the rain drum its wild rhythm on the roof. I pressed my palms to the steering wheel until the bones in my hands remembered they'd been made for holding on. "If truth is all I have left," I whispered, "then I'll make sure it speaks." I didn't know it then, but that was the first time in a long time that I sounded like myself. I turned the key. The engine coughed awake. Headlights cut through the rain like tired eyes, choosing to stay open. Because what came next was not revenge. It was something deeper. The moment when silence finally began to speak. I drove. The road along the coast shone black and slick, a ribbon of water laid on top of the world. I found a pull-off near the dunes and let the car idle while the storm rehearsed its rage. The rain smelled like the ocean that night. Our house sat quietly between pine trees and the sea breeze. But for the first time since I was a girl, I wasn't there to belong to it. I was here, blinking at a blank laptop screen, hands shaking with a clarity that didn't feel like courage, yet, but would. I pulled the separate drive from my coat, the one Henry had wired to the little camera hidden in the living room. For a beat, the screen stayed black. Then a flicker. My home appeared. My lamp, the safe, the hush of a room that thought it was alone. Sabrina stepped into frame, phone to her ear, voice low and quick, humorless. "She's asleep. The old woman won't even notice till morning. Sell it before she dies." I didn't gasp this time. I cried, quietly, as if the tears were being careful with me for once. I scrolled forward. Timestamps slid past like spilled beads. 2 shadows crossed the room. Ethan's voice, unsure. "Are you sure?" Sabrina's whisper sharpened. "Trust me. We'll fix everything after." The screen blurred through my tears. I didn't watch more. I didn't need to. There are moments when truth stops being a thing you chase and becomes a thing that stands in front of you, steady and lit from the inside. I copied the files to a new drive. I labeled it with a name only I would understand. Home, still. Then I closed the laptop and put my forehead on the steering wheel the way you do when you're too tired to pray and too human not to. The rain gentled, turning from rage to confession. In that small pause, I heard my own breath, raw but even, and something in me, something I'd put away after Henry died, stood up. I started the engine again and drove toward town. The night felt less like a wall and more like a road. Hi, Tier. I didn't go back to the house. Not yet. I checked into a roadside motel with a buzzing sign and a clerk who didn't ask questions. I slept like a person who'd decided to keep going. In the morning, I called Mr. Coleman, the family lawyer who'd known Henry longer than I had. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he said, "Bring me the drive. Bring yourself too." When I stepped into his office, he didn't greet me with pity. He greeted me with chairs. People who offer you a place to sit are rarely your enemies. We watched the footage together. No one spoke. Silence can be a person sometimes. Present, sympathetic, impossibly patient. When the screen dimmed, Coleman folded his hands. "We'll need to file reports, pull pawn records, freeze what we can. You understand this will be public." "Truth already is," I said. "The rest is just catching up." He nodded. "We'll schedule a meeting. Ethan and Sabrina together. It's better if they hear it where the law lives." I left his office with a folder full of papers and a heart that, for the first time in weeks, felt like it knew its job again. To keep me alive long enough to watch the end of the story. 8 days later, I stood outside our house with a key that suddenly felt like a vote. I used it. The door opened. The smell of pine cleaner was too new and too much. Sabrina was in the kitchen, polishing a glass she'd never fill. Ethan sat at the table, staring at bills, as if numbers could apologize. "Mr. Coleman asked me to tell you we have a meeting tomorrow," I said. "Both of you. It concerns assets and authorizations." Sabrina raised her chin. "Is this really necessary?" "Yes," I said, "it is." Ethan looked like he wanted to leave his own skin. "Mom, we'll talk tomorrow," I said, "where people write things down." I didn't stay. I didn't argue. I went back to the motel and watched the ocean from a borrowed window. The storm had spent itself. The sea was tired and beautiful. I thought of Henry, of the way he'd tie a knot twice when he wanted a thing to last, of the small camera he'd tucked into our living room, not because he was afraid of us, but because he trusted the future to show up and ask for proof. "Thank you," I told him out loud, because sometimes our dead need to hear it. The next day, I sat in Mr. Coleman's office with my hands folded like I was in church. The blinds cut the sunlight into tidy ribbons. Ethan and Sabrina came together. They sat together. Even their silence sat together. "Thank you for coming," Coleman began. "Mrs. Hayes has something to share." He didn't say, "your mother" or "your mother-in-law." He said, "Mrs. Hayes." Titles can hurt or heal. Today, it felt like a bandage. I pressed play. The room filled with my living room. Sabrina's voice filled with Sabrina. "She's asleep. Sell it before she dies." Ethan flinched, like he'd been touched by something hot and invisible. Sabrina's mouth opened and closed twice. Words go missing sometimes when people find out they've been recorded by their own life. Coleman slid a document across the table, a forged authorization form, signed in Mrs. Hayes's name, dated 2 weeks before the pawning. His voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. "I didn't," Sabrina began, then stopped, then tried again. "I did what I had to do. We needed." "You sold my father's legacy," Ethan said, and his voice broke on father like it was learning the word for the first time. He looked at me finally, eyes red and real. "Mom, I'm sorry." I nodded. "We believe what we can until we can't." Coleman made calls. Officers arrived. Shoes moved in and out of doorways. Paperwork multiplied like leaves. I sat very still. The truth didn't need me to help it. It was steady on its own feet. When they led Sabrina out, she turned back once. Her eyes weren't angry. They were empty. People think anger is the opposite of love. It isn't. Emptiness is. Ethan sank into a chair after the door closed. He put his face in his hands and let himself be a boy. "I should have believed you," he said. Sometimes forgiveness is just the sound of a mother standing up and making tea. Come home later, I said. We'll talk where we can hear each other. He nodded, like a person drowning who just remembered the swim to shore. That night, I drove back to the water and watched the last of the storm lay itself down. I thought of everything that had been taken and everything that hadn't. Objects can be stolen, meaning can't. I sat in the car until the dashboard clock clicked 1 minute into tomorrow. The rain had become a mist that clung more than it fell. Somewhere in the distance, a train moaned its low, faithful note. I breathed in the smell of salt and pine and wet earth, our old trinity, the one that kept this town honest. This is just the beginning, I said aloud, testing the shape of a future that didn't have to ask permission. If truth is a voice, I'm done whispering. I turned the car toward home. The rain didn't stop all night. It followed me down the coast like a memory that refused to fade. Our old sedan coughed as it climbed the hill outside town, headlights cutting through the mist like tired eyes, searching for something that might still be good in this world. I pulled over near the dunes, turned off the engine, and let the ocean speak. For a while, I just sat there, a woman in her late 60s, clutching a box that held nothing but the echo of everything she'd loved. The air smelled of wet pine and salt. Henry used to say, storms cleanse more than roofs. They cleanse souls. Maybe he was right. My hands were shaking when I opened my laptop. I plugged in the small drive Henry had wired to the hidden camera. For a second, the screen stayed black. Then a flicker, and there it was, my living room, bright and sharp, recorded in silence. The timestamp glowed at the corner. The same night Sabrina went for groceries. I pressed play. At first, nothing. Just the hum of the house, the shadow of rain moving across the window. Then, Sabrina appeared on the screen, phone to her ear, whispering, "She's asleep. The old woman won't even notice till morning. Sell it before she dies." Her voice was light, casual, the kind of tone you'd use talking about weather, not betrayal. Something inside me cracked, but didn't shatter this time. Instead, tears slid quietly down my cheeks. Slow, deliberate, warm against the cold. I wasn't angry anymore, just empty. So empty that the next sound startled me. It wasn't from the laptop. It was a voice. Deep, calm, familiar, like wind through pine trees. Pain is proof that your heart still remembers who you are. I froze. The voice came from nowhere. Or everywhere. Maybe it was memory, maybe madness, but it spoke again, steady and clear. When people take from you, Maggie, they only touch the surface. What they can't steal is the part of you that gave. I closed my eyes. The sound of waves filled the silence between his words. I thought of all the times I'd watered my garden while Sabrina scrolled through her phone. All the dinners I'd cooked, the nights I'd prayed for her happiness. Maybe those were the seeds I'd planted. Not wasted, just buried deep, waiting for the right rain. Every storm has two faces, the voice continued. One that destroys, and one that reveals. Tonight, you saw both. I whispered into the dark. Who are you? Someone who once forgot his own storms. The voice said gently. Call me Orion Sage, if names matter. You're not broken, Maggie. You're being reminded. A tear hit the keyboard. Reminded of what? That truth isn't something you fight for. It's something you live long enough to let unfold. For a moment, I imagined a figure standing outside in the rain. Coat fluttering, eyes kind, but unflinching. The lightning painted his silhouette on the windshield. Maybe it was real. Maybe it was the reflection of the screen. I didn't know, but his words stayed, like warmth after fire. Don't chase justice in anger, he said. Show it. Let them hear their own echo. And when the echo fades, you'll still be standing. The wind howled, shaking the car, but inside, everything was still. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace, but from clarity. I looked back at the video, at the proof of betrayal glowing on the screen. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't tremble. I knew what I needed to do. I copied the file to a new drive, slipped it into the pocket of my coat, and wiped the tears from my face. They kept coming anyway, but softer now, like rain easing into mist. Before closing the laptop, I whispered, "Thank you, whoever you are." The screen dimmed, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw a small line of text appear. When you live by truth, you never lose. Maybe I imagined it, maybe not. I started the engine again, headlights slicing through the fog. The storm was thinning, but the road ahead still shimmered with rain. In the reflection of the rearview mirror, my eyes looked different. Not younger, not happier, just awake. "Henry," I murmured, "you told me to keep them safe. I couldn't keep the gold, but I can keep the truth." Outside, dawn began to crawl through the clouds, a faint silver line over the horizon, the kind that doesn't promise warmth yet, but whispers, "It's coming." And for the first time since everything fell apart, I believed it. If you've ever lost something that meant more than money, stay with me, because what came next wasn't revenge. It was something deeper. And if you're watching on your phone or computer, tap like so I know you're still here. The silence is about to speak. I drove into the dark, but it didn't feel like darkness anymore. It felt like the hour before dawn, when the world is still deciding to forgive itself. Somewhere behind me, the tide was already turning back. Somewhere ahead of me, the truth had left the door open. The sun rose, pale and silver, over the ocean, light spreading across the wet road as I drove back into town. The storm had left puddles everywhere, tiny mirrors reflecting pieces of a world that had been washed clean. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face what was waiting for me, but the truth was, Mr. Coleman, our family lawyer, met me at the cafe on Main Street. He'd known Henry for 30 years. When I slid the drive across the table, his brow furrowed. "Are you sure you want this, Maggie? Once it's shown, there's no going back." "I'm not going back," I said. "Not anymore." 2 days later, we sat in Mr. Coleman's office, Ethan, Sabrina, and me. Outside, gulls screamed over the sea. Inside, you could hear the hum of the old ceiling fan slicing through silence. "Thank you all for coming," Coleman began. "Mrs. Hayes has something to show you." I looked at Ethan. He couldn't meet my eyes. Sabrina smirked, confident, careless. I pressed play. The video filled the screen. The living room bathed in lamplight. Sabrina pacing with her phone. Her voice cut through the air like glass. "She's asleep. The old woman won't even notice till morning. Sell it before she dies." Ethan's head snapped up. His breath caught. "Sabrina, what is this?" She stammered. That's not... Someone must have..." Coleman paused the video, then quietly laid a document on the table. "Power of attorney forged under your signature, Mrs. Lee. Dated 3 weeks ago." Sabrina's face drained of color. "I didn't mean... Ethan, I was just..." He whispered, "You sold my father's legacy." The air turned heavy, like the moment before thunder. For a second, I pitied her. Then I remembered Henry's necklace glinting in her palm. The police were called. Words blurred. Fraud, theft, charges. But through it all, I stayed silent. The truth didn't need me to scream. It was screaming for itself. When they led her out, she looked back once. Her eyes weren't angry, just empty, like someone who finally saw the mirror she'd been avoiding. When the door closed, Ethan sank to his knees. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. I touched his shoulder, gentle. We all believe what we're ready to see. He sobbed into my coat like he was 10 again. I thought I'd feel victory. Instead, I felt the strange quiet that comes after lightning. The world still trembling, but alive. Coleman handed me the recovered jewelry in sealed bags. I stared at them, then shook my head. Keep them in the vault. I don't need them back yet. Are you sure? Yes. They belong to the lesson more than to me now. That evening, I walked along the boardwalk. The ocean was calmer. The air smelled of cedar and salt. And there, sitting on the same bench Henry used to love, was a man I'd never met but somehow recognized. A coat the color of dusk, silver in his beard, eyes deep as tidewater. You kept your promise, he said, without turning. Who are you? A friend of the truth. He smiled faintly. Orion Sage, if you need a name. I sat beside him. The waves rolled in slow rhythm, like the world finally breathing again. They took everything, I whispered. No, he said. They took the objects. You kept the meaning. Meaning doesn't pay the bills, but it pays the soul, he replied. And a clear soul creates everything else. He pointed toward the horizon. See that line between sea and sky? People call it distance, but it's connection. Same with pain. It looks like separation, but it's the bridge to understanding. I closed my eyes. Then why did it have to hurt this much? Because deep roots only grow in broken ground. His words settled like sunlight after rain. You see, Maggie, he continued softly, what happened wasn't punishment. It was awakening. You learned the weight of attachment and the lightness of truth. Now teach that. Live that. The gulls circled above us, crying into the wind. He stood, the light behind him turning gold. The storm didn't destroy your home. It washed the windows so you could see. Then he walked away, fading into the haze, until only the echo of his footsteps remained. Weeks later, the house no longer smelled of perfume. I reopened the safe, cleaned, repaired, new lock glinting under the lamp. Inside, I placed one thing, Henry's wedding band. The rest I donated to a foundation that helps widows rebuild their lives. Ethan helped me sign the papers. Tears, soft but sincere. Sometimes, redemption sounds like paperwork and quiet coffee between mother and son. That night, as rain whispered against the roof again, I brewed 2 cups of tea, one for me, one for whoever was still listening. I looked at the empty chair across the table and said, we kept them safe, Henry. Not the jewels, the love. Then, I turned toward the camera on the mantel, the one that had once caught deceit. I hit record. I don't know if this story made you cry or made you breathe a little softer, but if it touched you, just type 1 in the comments. And if you didn't like it, that's okay too. Maybe just hit like or subscribe so you can argue with me in the next one. It's been 3 months since the storm. The garden has bloomed again. Every morning, I water the roses and watch how they open. Not because the sun tells them to, but because they've learned they can. The same house that once felt haunted now hums softly again. The air smells like clean rain and new beginnings. Ethan visits every Sunday. He fixes things. He apologizes less now and loves better. I think that's what growth looks like. The jewelry's gone, but I kept one piece, the amber stone Henry gave me. I placed it by the window where the first light lands. It glows gold each dawn, quiet proof that loss can still shine. One afternoon, while trimming the roses, I saw him again, Orion Sage, walking up the path as if he'd been here all along. The garden made it, he said. It did. I smiled. So did I. No, he said gently. You didn't just make it. You became it. We sat on the porch, tea steaming between us. The ocean whispered somewhere beyond the trees. I still think of that night, I said. Then you've learned its lesson, Orion Sage replied, which is, that truth doesn't punish. It polishes. I laughed softly. You talk like my husband. Then he must have talked like the sea, calm after chaos. The breeze shifted. The world felt lighter. Orion Sage, I asked, will it ever stop hurting completely? He smiled. Maybe not, but one day the pain will learn to sit quietly beside you, and you'll call it wisdom. He stood, turning toward the waves. Keep the light on, Maggie. Someone lost out there might see it. Then he was gone, like a reflection fading as the water settles. That night, I sat by the window, camera blinking red. If you've watched till now, I said, voice low, then maybe you've felt something shift. Even just a little. I can't promise life will be kind, but I can promise that truth always finds its way home. I looked out at the sea, the amber stone glowing faintly in the dark. So when your next storm comes, don't hide. Let it wash you clean. A pause, a breath, then a small smile. And if this story found you when you needed it most, give it a like, share it with someone who's still in their storm, and subscribe to stay with us for more family drama stories guided by Orion Sage.